Thank you very much for joining us today. The two Ds, digitalization and decarbonization, as a recent TradeWinds headline ran, are the big issues of our day and the major themes on the road to operational excellence. In this panel, we're talking cybersecurity. In an increasingly digitalized world, we increasingly need to be digitally or cyber secure. In 2021, next year, IMO guidance on cybersecurity becomes applicable. So how are we going to meet the IMO 2021 cybersecurity mandate to protect ships, seafarers, cargoes, and the environment, as well as ports and infrastructure? How prepared is the industry to manage cyber risk? There have been a number of very high-profile cases of cyber attacks affecting shipping companies, and most recently a very serious one affecting a shipyard. What are the risks we face, while also making sure we can reap the full benefits of digitalization? Well, we have an excellent panel to talk us through the issues and tell us how they see things and what's going to happen now. So thank you to Nicholas, Annie, Eleni, and all at Capital Link for setting this up today. Let's get started. My name is Nick Brown. I work in the Marine and Offshore division of Bureau Veritas here in Paris. Let me introduce our fantastic panel. We have Charis Plakantonaki. She's the Chief Strategy Officer at Star Bulk Carriers, the largest US-listed dry cargo company in the world. Captain Rob COMPHER. He's a Chief in the Office of Design and Engineering Standards at the United States Coast Guard, the federal agency with responsibility for ensuring America's maritime safety, security, and stewardship. Jean-Baptiste Gillet is the Director of Advanced Services at Bureau Veritas Marine and Offshore, a leading classification society and multi-sector testing, inspection, and certification organization. Charalambos, or Babis, Kalevrosoglou is the Information Security Officer at Tototheo, providers of solutions in satellite communication, navigation systems, and digitalization services. Lastly, but certainly not least, David Fu is a Senior Director, Operations Technology at the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. So I'm hoping to help the participants identify what, from their own perspectives, are the key issues related to maritime cybersecurity, all in the context, of course, of connected ships and connected ports, including the need to maximize the opportunities of digitalization. New ships with more sensors and software across many items of equipment will be needed for shipping to take the maximum advantage of the potential benefits that are now emerging. But they will also need to be cyber protected. So if we start with the ship owner, Charis, what would you like to go first? What are the key issues from your standpoint as a leading operator of bulk carriers?
Thank you, Nicholas, and hello everyone, and thank you to Capital Link for the invitation today. So there is no doubt that automation and digitalization in the shipping industry are progressing faster than ever today. We literally see a new technology or platform being presented to us every week, whether we're talking about commercial management, technical management, financial management, and of course also with regards to connectivity and operating technologies on board our vessels. Also, the recent pandemic has accelerated even further the adoption and use of cyber communication. Now, the more shipping companies embrace technology, and as Nicholas already mentioned, the more vulnerable they are to malicious attacks to their systems and networks. And in that respect, we see considerations when it comes to safety, environment, commercial impact, and of course also there is a risk to compromise the integrity and the availability of data and also the financials of a company. Now, in this context, cybersecurity is not a nice to have discussion anymore, but a mandatory practice for all shipping companies. And I would say especially the ones who aspire to be front runners on digitalization and automation. And to the question of how we ensure maritime cybersecurity, we definitely need to look into the mandate that comes from the senior management of a company. So the need to protect the company's information and operating technology in order to safeguard confidentiality, availability, and integrity of data and operations has to start from the top management of a team. And it is critical that the management team understands and recognizes the risks involved and is engaged throughout the process of developing, implementing, and maintaining cybersecurity systems, policies, and processes. As an example, here at Starbulk, we have a holistic plan in place, and we make sure to report on a quarterly basis directly to our board of directors on developments related to cybersecurity, and also on progress that is made on relevant projects we have underway at any given time. Now, a second challenge in ensuring maritime cybersecurity, I would say, is awareness and training among crews on board, and also among shore employees, training on how to identify and respond to cyber attacks. Because no matter how good your systems, policies, and processes, absence of a cybersecurity culture can expose a company and its vessel to unnecessary risks. Again, as an example, here at Starbulk, we are in the process of providing cybersecurity training to our seafarers during crew forums that we conduct in Manila, where we have an exclusive crewing agency. We also are in the process of providing training remotely, and of course during onboard attendances, not at the moment because we have suspended those, but as soon as we are back on board with attendances, we will be implementing those as well. And of course, as to shore personnel, frequent alerts are important to make sure that cyber risks remain top of mind and latest hacking techniques are communicated. Now, another challenge, I would say, is that as technology evolves, cyber attacks become more and more unpredictable and severe. And in that respect, it is important that no matter how advanced the cybersecurity systems a company has in place, that these defenses are frequently challenged, for example, by penetration tests. We recently ran a project here at Starbulk during which we performed a real-time hacking simulation to our networks and systems, including those of our vessels. And this was an extremely helpful project because it resulted in a list of enhancements. Initially, it identified our existing vulnerabilities, but then it resulted in a list of enhancements which will hopefully further safeguard our information technology and operating technology environment. And we are at the moment in the process of implementing those. So as a final note, I would also like to mention that it is quite probable that a determined attacker will eventually achieve to penetrate the defenses of a company or a vessel, but still there are patterns in the moves of an attacker, which is something that can be predicted and therefore offer a warning, provided that the company has appropriate centralized monitoring procedures in place. And this is one more practice which we are currently exploring here at Starbulk, specifically the installation of an advanced endpoint detection response tool. Such systems enable us to monitor our information technology and operating technology systems for abnormal behavior and therefore mitigate cyber risks. Thank you.
Thank you, Charis. That's very comprehensive. Thank you for that, and of course we'll come back to you in the second half. Rob, in Washington, D.C., the first time I heard about cybersecurity really as a big issue was raised by one of your colleagues quite a long time ago at an Intertanko meeting. The Assistant Commandant, Paul Thomas, back then was raising awareness of the issue. From the Coast Guard's perspective today, how do you see the landscape at the moment? And I mean, clearly, you're not operating ships that will need to be compliant with the IMO requirements. But you've got such a multifaceted area of responsibility. What does the landscape look like to you at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and hello everybody out there, and good morning. And I'd also like to thank Capital Link for hosting and inviting me to be on the panel. I'm very excited about the discussion this morning. So, yeah, as far as the landscape, there's a number of risks that we see out there for vessels and really the whole maritime transportation system. We've got increasing dependencies on computers, cyber technologies for navigation, for communications, for the engineering systems on vessels, which of course impacts the safety of the operating environment. You've got cargo handling systems and really many other operational applications. These increasing dependencies certainly increase the risk, but on top of that, there's also the interconnectedness in the ports. You can't just look at vessels in isolation. It's really a system of systems that is between ports and the facilities and the vessels and all of the other links in the maritime supply chain, each of which, by the way, is typically owned by different elements and have different levels of cyber risk management and hygiene practices. And a failure of any one of those links can cause disruptions for all the other links in the chain and cause big problems for the port and the Coast Guard and all the operators on the waterfront and other vessels. So those increasing dependencies really elevate the risk, but the interconnectedness of all of those elements increase the consequences when we look at a particular event. So other challenges, it's still largely an unknown number of adversaries and type of adversaries out there in the cyber world, coming from many vectors that I think continues to evolve as we get better about cyber protection as regulators or as vessel owners or whoever. These adversaries are evolving as well and getting better. So we put measures in place to protect, and they figure out different ways to work around it. So as regulators, that presents significant challenges for us. We need compliance alternatives that are broad enough and flexible enough to adapt to this changing landscape. And Charis made a very good point about training too. We need a workforce that's trained in cyber risk management, how to spot potential problems and respond when issues do arise. In the Coast Guard, we have a very strong workforce of port state control examiners and vessel inspectors on the domestic side, and at the upper levels are captains of ports and folks in management. And we're very adept in vessel systems and vessel operations, but cyber risk management skills is kind of a new skill set in an area that we need to grow and are continuing to grow right now. And we need to do that in concert with industry. That's what we're trying to do is develop that training to make sure we stay ahead of those adversaries and on par with what our industry partners are doing. Another challenge I was thinking about as I was preparing for this, it's over the horizon a few years, a little bit, but autonomous vessel technology, we've seen a lot of interest in that here, at least domestically in the US. And there's an inherent link between increased levels of automation and cyber technology. I think everybody understands that. We're not at a point yet, at least in the US, where we have fully autonomous vessels yet, but there is a push for more automation of onboard systems. Again, back to that interconnectedness point, we need to be very smart about how we account for cyber when we do start implementing more autonomous or automation and autonomous technology on vessels. So I'll kind of leave it at that. Again, increasing dependencies and interconnectedness are the big ones. The unknown adversary and the training piece is very relevant right now as well, especially as we move toward 2021 and start having, start the process of enforcing some of the IMO ISM guidelines.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for that. And we'll come back later towards the end as to how you feel the industry overall is prepared in the second half. But if I turn now to my colleague, Jean-Baptiste in Paris. Jean-Baptiste, what's the class perspective, and what are you working on at the moment?
Thanks, Nick, and hello everybody, and thanks to Capital Link for hosting this event. Well, at Bureau Veritas, we see as many observers that the cyber risk has become today very prominent for all the businesses. And typically, there was a risk barometer developed by Allianz, the insurance company, that ranked cybersecurity as the major risk, along with business interruption for companies and corporates in general. So obviously, this was before the COVID crisis, but it shows that today, for all the businesses, it's a major risk. And the figures are impressive. And just to remind them, only in the US, the FBI is reporting several billions of revenues from ransomware. So cybercrime has become a business by itself, and the cost associated to recover, to protect on cybersecurity is evaluated at several hundred of billions of dollars, according to a well-recognized McAfee study. So it's really big, and today shipping companies are not exempted from it. I will not mention names, but I'm sure we have all seen in the news these companies from Europe, from China, that have been attacked in the last years, and including in 2020, and not to mention the ongoing attack towards a yard in Europe. So the cyber risk is everywhere onshore for shipping companies, and with increasing connectivity to implement what we call the smart ship use cases, and that will ultimately enable automatization, but even the simple digitization use cases, well, we need to create connectivity with the ship, and this introduces new vulnerabilities and new opportunities for hackers. So the risk is really real. And the challenge we see at Bureau Veritas is that the level of awareness and maturity of ship owners is very different. Of course, you have ship owners like Starbulk who are well advanced into analyzing the cyber risk and taking actions to protect themselves. But we see also many other companies that have not started and that are waiting basically for the IMO requirements to be set up to start working. So ship owners need to anticipate, and we strongly support them into this, because we see it also as an opportunity. As I said before, if the ship owners want to capture the gains from digitization, they need to make sure that they have solid IT foundations that start with good IT hygiene. And by ensuring the basics of cybersecurity, you ensure that you have these good IT foundations. So it's an opportunity to position yourself well for the digitization. Nick, I think you're in mute, but I'm done on my side.
Great. No, thanks, JB. You can hear me now. So we'll come back to, obviously, you again later. Charalambos, Babis, from your perspective at Tototeo, how do you see the market and the opportunities and risks you're helping manage?
Of course. Thank you, Nick, for the introduction. Hello to everyone. I will start by saying that everyone in the industry is discussing about this regulation of IMO 2021, and it's very reasonable. We are being asked from our customers what they have to do in order to be compliant with the upcoming regulations about their vessels. Many of them, they want to extend the regulation option, the compliance option to their offices. I have the feeling that everyone is a little bit stressed about that. I will try to summarize the basic risks and challenges about cybersecurity in the maritime industry, and which are the main points that we need to pay attention in order to be more effectively compliant. Indeed, it is very challenging to develop an effective and affordable information security system which will apply on board vessels. Due to the nature of vessels, it is very important to take into account all the limitations, like the bandwidth, the change of crews, the systems on board, that many of them are not secured by design, so we have to secure them. The third parties using vessel systems, and of course, as the other panelists mentioned, the lack of awareness in the crew, which is very crucial. Moreover, due to the connectivity of vessels to the internet, hackers using free or low cost, very low cost resources, and they are able to exploit possible vulnerabilities that there are, and we know that there are in both IT and OT systems. Of course, we have to take care and from the insider, from a malicious actor from insider, or by mistake from an insider, etc. Considering the above, we understand that all this can expose companies' assets to a great risk. Of course, there are risks and challenges, but I believe, and we believe at Tototeo, that there is also a big opportunity here. An opportunity to improve the overall security of the vessels, as well as well as the company's infrastructure and the operations. By raising the awareness of crews and office personnel, it will be very helpful for regulation compliance in order to know how to defend in a potential threat, how to respond to an incident, etc. Moreover, if we have in place policy and procedure which will apply on board vessels, we have to develop them considering the needs and the expectations of the ship owner, and to make clear to all the personnel and the crew that these policies and procedures, processes, etc., are here for some reason, with some scope. Of course, we have to take into consideration the uniqueness of each vessel. We cannot apply every policy and every procedure for all the fleet. I believe that with a well-structured plan, there is the ability to improve the overall situation on board and to change the cybersecurity mentality of personnel by using specific techniques like awareness, as Ms. Plakantonaki mentioned before, and to give them examples from personal life in order to be able to adopt it to their business life. I think you are muted.
Sorry, bad discipline. Thank you, Babi. That's very helpful. So David, now finally, your turn. On the MPA, you've got a very large port to run with massive ambitions as well in terms of increasing cargo and lots of projects related to digital connectivity. What's your perspective on the current status of cyber security in the shipping industry today?
Well, thank you very much, Nicholas, and thank you to the Capital Link for organizing this forum. I really don't disagree with a lot of what my fellow distinguished panelists have said, but let me offer some perspectives as a port regulator. So in Singapore, I think for us, we do agree that I think you've also heard yesterday from the IMO SecGen that digitalization is here to stay. And it's important to ensure that we take the opportunity, for example, in this COVID situation, to push ahead, because the future of work will change. The way that COVID actually impacts workflows and processes will also change. So we need to be able to adapt and be able to see this as an opportunity to really push ahead with digitalization. In Singapore, for us, we do want to support a lot of the digitalization initiatives. For example, the single window framework. For us, we have already created a new platform called Digital Port at SG, and all the various port clearances and all the regulatory transactions in the future will be digital. So increasingly, companies, ships, agents, they all will have to transact with digital platforms. And this connectivity is important because the efficiencies gathered from such initiatives will actually help spur growth, trade, help with businesses to be more compliant, to be more efficient. And that's important for us to actually grow the economy, to be able to grow trade. At the same time, I think on board ships, we've got about 140,000 ship arrivals every year. Last few months have been affected a little bit, but nevertheless to say that every ship that comes in represents a possible risk, by which cyber does not just remain within the cyber realm, because the impact can actually go beyond into the physical realm. So for example, if a ship is attacked from a cyber perspective and it affects the engines, for example, and you lose control of the ship, that can also lead to a navigational safety sort of situation. So we understand the shipping industry has been managing safety and pollution risks in accordance with the ISM code for the longest time. But bringing cyber risks into play can often be very challenging because they are usually harder to quantify, understand, and perhaps difficult to relate to the physical world around us. So we need to level up the knowledge in terms of the shipping industry, give them best practices. So for example, just like COVID, right? It's also a global threat. We need to basically look at cyber threats as global and to be able to partner with both shipping industries, with the various port regulators to ensure that systems are cybersecurity by design, so that we can actually strengthen the systems that we interact. And for cyber risk, actually, besides technology, the other two parts of it would be people and processes too. So we need to take care, because the weakest link can also be people. And we need to be able to then secure within the insider threats as well as external threats also. So for us at MPA in Singapore, we look at cyber as an ecosystem that we need to tackle from all various sort of perspectives, from the ship perspective to the port as well as the regulator. So in a sense, for us, we have also invested in a Maritime Cybersecurity Operations Center to actually look at monitoring on behalf of the entire maritime industry in Singapore, all the various important information infrastructure. So we have that as an initiative to be able to then alert us as the quickest possible way, possible attack. Because I think if you look at the various frameworks, the most important thing is really information that you can detect. And then because you can detect quickly, you can actually respond quickly too. So besides putting in place this security operations center, we also do exercises with the various players, whether it's going to be the port itself or the various shipping companies. We will have annual exercises where we go through certain standard operating procedures, how to tackle certain cyber security scenarios. I think with better training, better understanding of which agencies, who is responsible for which sort of responses, the key is we need to be able to respond to it as quickly as possible and as robustly, because we may only have one chance to be able to do this right. So for us, it has to be holistic. You need to essentially look in the entire spectrum from detection all the way to mitigation. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Nicholas.
Okay, super. Thank you, David. I mean, thank you to all of you. That's a very interesting overview of what's going on and your different perspectives and perceptions of where we are as an industry. With this new IMO 2021 cybersecurity mandate, coming into force on the 1st of January, what happens now? I mean, David, if I stick with you, from a practical perspective, are you worried about what's going to happen next year? I mean, I guess fundamentally nothing's changed. It's a question of whether ships are compliant and can demonstrate they're doing what needs to be done. Charis, at Starwalk has described their pretty sophisticated program and understanding of where we are. But looking across the whole market, and this will be one for you, Rob, as well. As a port, are you worried about the cyber protection of ships in general, looking ahead?
Well, if I could respond to that first. I think for us, we are all cognizant that every company, every ship will have different sorts of level of networks on board. So every situation will be very unique, and every company will have different levels of understanding of the risks, and will have different budgets, because I think money is also an important aspect about how much you want to invest in cyber security sort of solutions and tools. So we recognize some of these, but what's important is that there are certain best practices which are already available. And I think the ISM is really in the correct direction, because it gives a high level sort of guidance in terms of what companies ought to be aware about in terms of the different risks and the different solutions that are out there. So it's not going to be very prescriptive. It's going to be able to guide people. I would say the majority, if you can follow the ISM guidelines, you should be, I would say, in a much better position than if you had ignored it. So I think from us, our perspective is really to help to assist where we can, and to really encourage people to adopt it sooner rather than later. Because I think although it's going to be implemented in 2021, it's not due until the next inspection of your safety management system. So I think there's a little bit of leeway in terms of time, but we really need to get our act together right now. And one more thing, it's that the challenges of shipping is that even if you train the people, because as we know in ships, there will be crew changes, the cargo type may change, the different locations which the ships actually go to represents also different risks around the port. So it's not just a one port effort. We need to really work with all the other port authorities to make sure that we can actually have some sort of agreement. And in fact, I think information sharing is also one big area that I think we can improve much better. So for Singapore, we've already started leveraging on what we call the Port Authorities Roundtable. It's essentially a grouping of port authorities to come together to discuss some of the more strategic issues, of which cybersecurity is one of them. And we're going to set up a system to be able to alert each other of some of the cyber security situations around the world. Because if it affects one port, it can very well, in very quick succession, affect other ports also around the world. So I think if we can actually get together to do information sharing much better, it will give us a lot more chance to be able to address the various threats. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Babi, what's your perspective in terms of what happens now?
Look, can you hear me? Okay, yeah. Yep. I believe that in order to meet the requirements of IMO in January 2021, we need a practical approach, as you said in the beginning, which will give to shipping companies the compliance points that they need in order to ensure the conformity with the new regulation. We have designed a practical approach combining experience both from maritime industry and from cybersecurity field, which can guide a shipping company to secure their vessels and their operations. Very briefly, because we will not have so many time.
Right, we're running out of time.
Yeah. I will mention some points of our approach. When we want to design a cybersecurity system, we have first of all to know the scope of that, where we will apply that. We have to keep in mind that everything in cybersecurity is risk-based. All the decisions have to be the outcome of a risk management procedure, which will ensure that the company is well placed to defend potential threats and vulnerabilities, as well as to ensure security of corporate data. Of course, it is very important here to mention, as mentioned before, that this needs and the management commitment in order to be effective and successful. It is very crucial to include to every risk-based procedure both IT and OT equipment. We know very well that OT equipment has a lot of vulnerabilities. There are systems that remain on board for more than 5-10 years without any security by design. So we need to pay attention on that too. Furthermore, very important part is the awareness of the personnel, both on board vessels and in the premises, as I mentioned before. Therefore, we need cyber-aware people. If I can say we have three main pillars: cyber-aware people, effective policy and procedures in place, and the suitable technical implementation which reflect our policies and procedures on board vessel or in our premises. The risk assessment process is very crucial in order to help shipping companies with the identification of their assets, their roles and their responsibilities, the implementation of procedural and technical countermeasures that we found out during the risk assessment process, as well as the activities to prepare and respond to cybersecurity incidents.
I'd better stop you there and let in some of the others, because now we're down to minutes. Thank you very much for that. Rob, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick.
Babi.
Try to be quick, Nick. So the Coast Guard, we've really maintained the posture over many years, probably back to when you first heard Admiral Thomas talk a few years ago, that as we tackle the cyber risk management issue, that we want the solution to how to achieve cybersecurity to be industry-led. Our goal is to create, we call it a corporate governance structure to proactively manage cyber risk. And that includes the development of third-party consensus standards for cyber, as well as training for particular roles and responsibilities for Coast Guard and industry personnel. so we continue to work that. We continue to work with ASTM and the class societies to develop these standards that fit within a framework that can capture the risks and evolve as the threats evolve. And I think we are getting there. I don't know what the final point looks like, because as I said, this is an evolving threat that I think will have, and the compliance standards will have to evolve over time to match the risks. I do want to mention real quick that we have developed some guidance, some useful guidance, I think, from the Coast Guard. We put out a navigation vessel inspection circular facility owners and operators on assessing computer systems and network vulnerabilities in ports just this past winter. And we have another guidance document for vessels coming out that will give some better guidance for vessels and owners and how to comply with the IMO resolution, as well as the reporting channels and what we will require within the U.S. when an incident does arise. So I'll cut it off there, Nick.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. Thank you for that. Charis, any final thoughts from Starbulk?
Thank you, Nicholas, and I will try to be brief as we have very few minutes left. I think it is important to note that IMO 2021 guidelines provide high-level recommendations which can be incorporated into existing risk management processes, and they are complementary to the safety and security management practices that are already established by the IMO. And in that respect, we at Starbulk, we have already developed vessel safety and security plans which provide guidance to crews and employees ashore regarding cybersecurity risks and how to handle them. These plans have been based on the IMO guidelines, but they are also based on ISO 27001, which specifies the requirements for establishing, implementing, and improving information security management system. And of course, we have also taken into consideration guidelines by BIMCO and other industry stakeholders, and also the US NIST framework. So at the moment, we are in the process of incorporating these plans into our SMS. And I think Jean-Baptiste mentioned preparedness, same as with IMO 2020, and in order to meet 2021 requirement, I think it is very important that shipping companies plan in advance and do not leave their preparedness until the last minute. And in addition to having plans, it is important that these plans are also audited by external parties. For example, many of our vessels have already been audited by parties such as RightShip and classification societies, obviously on a voluntary basis for now, given that, as David, I think, mentioned, the IMO encourages administrations to ensure that cybersecurity is addressed no later than the first annual verification of a company's DOC after January 2021. And final note, other than meeting the IMO requirement in paper, it is critical that shipping companies carry out also internal audits, whether through onboard attendances or remotely. Audits should also ensure what most of the panelists have also mentioned, that crews on board are familiar with the manuals, that they are well trained. And in that respect, also pre-embarkation familiarization is critical. Very, very last point, and I will leave you with that, is that shipping companies may also consider adopting cybersecurity notations by classification societies. This would, of course, imply additional costs, but it would ensure the review of relevant cybersecurity documentation and also the surveying on board the vessels. Thank you.
Charis, perfect. Thank you. Well, that tees you up nicely, Jean-Baptiste, to close the session for us.
Exactly. I think I have 30 seconds to close it, and I think Charis made the very perfect introduction. I mean, at BV, we fully support the preparation to IMO compliance. We have actually two class notations. One is cyber manage, which is really designed to prepare for IMO compliance, ensuring we take into account all the best practices developed by the US Coast Guard, by BIMCO, by the third-party provider like Tototeo. So we provide this framework for third-party review before the ISM audit happen, if ship owners are interested. And moving forward, as Mr. Fu from MPA mentioned, what is very important is to prepare also cybersecurity by design for the new buildings. So we have a separate framework, what is called Cybersecure, and we are working with IACS to harmonize these standards across classification societies to have a unified moving forward requirements to be shared with shipyards, with ship owners, and also other maritime stakeholders like ports and like the flag administration.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I think we're just about there. Very good to see you all. Thank you for all the time you spent preparing and sharing now here today. I mean, it sounds like the industry is quite well prepared for cybersecurity in terms of regulation, ports, Coast Guard, service providers, class, and of course, ship owners. But the watch where it is, get started now if you haven't already. There is a bit of leeway in terms of when your ISM audits may be falling due and when port state control may be, you know, able to come after you. So get on with it. And, you know, once again, thank you very much. I see it's dark in Singapore now, David. You know, dusk has fallen over there. I think the sun is probably well up in Washington. But wonderful to see you all. And thanks for joining us. All the best. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Nicholas.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you, everyone. Please head on to the Capital Link chat room to meet the speakers. We want to thank everyone for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Annie.